Kitchen Table Gaming, where today's challenge is to play with orcs and goblins without goblins. So only orcs on my side of the battlefield this time. On the other side of the table are the high elves, and this time they're using 2 star dragons. And the rest is basically Sisters of Avalorn and cavalry, so this is gonna be a tough challenge for me, playing this very non-competitive list. If you wanna see those lists, pause the video in 3, 2, 1. So let's have a look on how we deployed. So we were using a chance encounter deployment with special feature in the middle of the battlefield. We're also playing with domination, so keeping table quarters at the end of the game scores a lot of points. And I got to deploy on the bottom right, and because of the 2 impassable terrain features here, I got really squeezed, so the only way to really deploy effectively was to layer my units. So my wyvern is placed in front of my orcs and my boar boys is placed in front of my black orcs. So this causes a bit of a trouble, of course, because you can't engage with all of your units at once. One small thing to note here is that I placed my black orc war boss on boar outside of the boar unit, so he has a 360 vision and is placed behind the impassable terrain. On my opponent's side of the battlefield, he places both of his dragons in a very aggressive stance in the middle of the battlefield, and then his sisters in the back and his 2 units of silver helms facing one way each. And my thinking going into this game is that I do have a good chance of winning against the dragons with my big blocks of infantry if I can tie them down and challenge them out. But as always, star dragons will dictate the pace of the game, and they can decide when and where to engage with any of my units. But let's start the game. So the high elf player won the roll of a first turn and decided to go first, and this is the end of his first turn. And right from the start he gets travel mystical pathways off on his silver helms in the middle, and this was one of the few ways to get them out of threat range from my wyvern, so that was the first important spell. The second one is even stronger because he gets Courage of Inarion off on his Prince on Star Dragon, and this causes an incredible headache for me because my only way to beat the dragon is to outnumber him in combat and make him flee, but now he is unbreakable, so he is unkillable and unbreakable and unstoppable until I can dispel Courage of Inarion. But unless I can get within 18 inches of his dragon with my level 2 wizard, the only way to dispel it is with a fated dispel, and I need to roll an 11. The rest of my opponent's moves is basically swinging around my flanks with the Illyrian Reavers and blocking my war boss on boar by placing his other dragon facing off to the bottom. And that marks the end of a very successful first turn of the High Elves, and we move to Orcs and Goblins, turn 1. And despite leaving a wheel for my Boar Boys to wheel past his Star Dragon, I can't get quite far enough, and there is no way for my Boar Boys to get away, so I just instead place them right in front of the dragon and I line up my infantry behind them, so in this way I can get away with my Boar Boys by fleeing with them. My Wyvern flies in very aggressively to threaten both of his units of Silver Helms to the left, so there shouldn't be a way for them to get away at this point. I then have a small unit of Boar Boys and an Orc Chariot on my right, wheeling around and placing themselves behind the blue building. Unfortunately, I do not dispel Courage of Inarion this turn, but I do get off earthen ramparts on my big block of orcs, so that should keep the dragon away for a turn at least. In my shooting phase, the orcs also managed to take a wound off the star dragon with bow shots, but that is the end of my first turn, and we're off to the high elves, turn 2. And despite having earthen ramparts up on my orcs, he does charge with his Star Dragon, but also he charges with his Illyrian Reavers behind the blue building. The second thing he does here is that he flies around with his Mage on Dragon, and then he casts Summon Elemental Spirit in front of my Wyvern, so if this is not dispelled and it does not scatter next turn, it does block line of sight and my Wyvern will not be able to charge the Silver Helms, so an excellent play from my opponent here. In the combat phase, his Star Dragon is challenged out by my Orc Champion, and despite having his Illyrian Reavers in my flank, I do win the combat, but luckily for my opponent here, he does not flee with his Illyrian Reavers, and because they only give ground, they can't move out of combat with the building so close, so nothing really happens, and that marks the end of the High Elf's second turn, and we're off to Orcs and Goblins, turn 2. and I failed to dispel either Summon Elemental Spirit or Courage of an Orion here, and unfortunately for me here the Vortex does not scatter, so my Wyvern's line of sight is fully blocked and he will not be able to charge anything this turn. So already in my second turn the game is starting to feel a little bit hopeless actually, because my Wyvern will be charged by the other dragon next turn, and there is no chance, or a very slim chance, for me to dispel Courage of an Orion, and unless I manage to dispel it, his dragon will kill all of my units on the right side without any resistance really. So all I do in my movement phase is I rearrange some of the units sitting around the dragon, and then I move some of my other units around the blue building. I also charged my Black Orc War Boss on Boar into the flank of his dragon and announced a WAG, so I will have 2 static combat rest against the dragon this turn. When it comes turn to fight, I challenge the dragon out with one of my level 2 wizards, and again I win the combat. So the dragon gives ground because it's unbreakable, and again he's super lucky here because the Illyrian Reavers does not break. So this is how it looks at the end of my second turn, and we're off to the High Elves, turn 3. He starts by removing his own Vortex, then he charges into my Wyvern with both the Star Dragon and also his Silverhelms into my flank. In his shooting phase, the Sisters of Avalorn shoots at my Boar Boys who have peeked out behind the blue building, and they kill everyone but one of them. And we then move into the combat phase, and his Prince on Star Dragon rolls incredibly high here, and he one-shots and kills my War Boss on Boar. He then proceeds to overrun into my Orc unit and continues to fight, and this turn the combined effort from the Illyrian Reavers, the Hammerhand and the Dragon actually wins the combat against my Orcs, and I fall back in good order. A very important thing that happened here is that because my Chariot can now charge his Illyrian Reavers, he wanted to restrain and not follow up with my Orcs, but he failed the restraint test, and I am now free to charge with my Chariot next turn. And then we move to the second combat, where my Wyvern is fighting off both the Star Dragon and the Silverhelms in its flank. There is a challenge of course between the Wyvern and the Dragon, and my opponent here rolls very bad with the Dragon and I roll very good, partially of course because it's easier to hit the Mage than it is to hit the Prince. So in the end I end up winning this combat, and those Silverhelms break and flee. I push back the Dragon and then decide to pursue the Silverhelms, but I do not catch them. That marks the end of High Elf's third turn. Can we see a light at the end of the tunnel here when we start Orcs and Goblins, turn 3. And at the start of my turn, again, of course, I fail to dispel Courage of an Orion, but I then charge with my Wyvern into the fleeing Silverhelms, who I catch in the ruins and kill all of them. I charge with my Chariot into the Illyrian Reavers to get some points from that combat. And then I do have a think about charging with my Boar Boyz. It's a very tempting charge into the rear of the dragon, but because I failed to dispel Courage of an Orion, I instead decide to just march up with them, where of course his dragon can charge them, but then I will just decide to flee. But that is all I do in my movement phase, and so then we move into the combat again against the Prince on Star Dragon. My Chariot wipes out the unit of Illyrian Reavers, and that gets me enough points to win the combat against the dragon. He is challenged by my final wizard though, who gets killed, so the dragon is pushed back 2 inches. That is the end of my third turn, so we move to the High Elves, turn 4. And my opponent now starts thinking about the objective, so he's spreading out all of his Reavers and Knights all across the battlefield to score the domination objective. He then charges with his Mage Dragon into my Boar Boys, who I decide to flee with. He then redirects with the dragon into my Chariot, and I decide to also flee with that one. So this is how the battlefield looks after all the moves have been completed. And in his shooting phase, he kills off the final Boar Boy at the top of the battlefield. And we move into the combat phase, where this turn the dragon has nothing that can challenge him. So he kills 12 of the Orcs in a single blow, and I am unlucky enough to actually flee with them, and he runs them down. So the dragon has now feasted on my big block of Orcs. But now we move into Orcs, turn 4, where a great opportunity reveals itself. Because when he redirected with his Mage Star Dragon, and when my Orc unit died, there is now a possible charge for my Black Orcs to charge into the flank of his dragon. I need a 6 to make it though, and I declare it. And my opponent now of course has a choice to flee with the dragon and not take the risk of me rolling a 6. He does not flee, and I do roll a 6, so my Black Orc unit connects with the flank of his Star Dragon, who is not unbreakable, so this is fantastic for me. In my turn I also rally with both the Boar Boyz and the Chariot, so I spread them out like this. I also engage with my Wyvern again to threaten both of his units of Sisters of Avalorn, and then we move into the oh so important combat. I challenge the dragon with my Black Orc champion, who dies of course, but I have a ton of static combat res in this unit, so I break the dragon and it flees. It flees 10 inches, but I also roll a 10, so I run it down. So not only do I kill the dragon, but also Courage of Inarion gets dispelled because the mage dies, and suddenly the game is on again when we move into High Elves, turn 5. And he starts by moving away most of his sisters out of the vision from my Wyvern, and then the dragon slowly moves in again. He's not as confident as he was when he was unbreakable. He then starts shooting at my Boar Boyz, but he only manages to kill one of them this turn, so that is the end of High Elves' 5th turn. We move into the Orcs, turn 5. And here I have a long hard think about whether I should charge with my Boar Boyz into the Sisters unit, because he will have a stand and shoot where he might kill some of them. He will then also strike first in the combat where he might also kill something, and I'm at a point in this game where I don't want to lose the opportunity I've been given. But all logic is thrown out the window and I started to think like a true orc, so I just charged in. So this is how it looks after my charges has been done. I wanted to prevent also some of the movement at the bottom. I don't want him to be able to move into my bottom right with his Illyrian Reaver, so I placed my Orc Chariot behind the impassable terrain like this to prevent them from moving in. I also wanted to threaten the units at the bottom with my Wyvern, but there was no way of me flying over the combat here without being threatened by his dragon, so I needed to place my Wyvern as you can see here. I also turned my Black Orc unit around and started the march towards the center objective. This would be worth 250 points at the end of the game if I can hold it. And then we move into the combat between my Boar Boyz and the Sisters of Avalorn. And the stand and shoot didn't do any damage, but the sisters managed to kill 2 of the Boar Boyz in combat. The Boar Boyz then killed 5 of the sisters, so I won the combat, but the sisters did not flee from combat. So this is how it looks at the end of my 5th turn, when we move into the final turn of the High Elves, turn 6. And because I prevented movement into my bottom right with my Chariot, he instead moves his dragon down, so he does not engage with the dragon, but instead decides to score with it. That is all he does, so we move into the combat phase, and this turn again I win the combat. The sisters fall back 6 inches, and I decide to restrain with my Boar Boyz. This is to get my charge bonuses next turn, and he will not be able to stand and shoot anyway. So we then move into the final turn of the Orcs, and I charge with both my Boar Boyz and the Wyvern into the sisters, who I kill all of them, and I then spread out the rest of my units, so the Black Orcs move in to grab the center objective. I also managed to march far enough to claim the bottom right quadrant. So this ended up a very tight and very interesting game, despite the very bad start for me, where Courage of Inarion basically ended the entire game for me. So I'm very happy I got the opportunity to charge into the Mage Dragon, and he did not flee, and I did roll a 6 and then managed to run him down, so maybe a bit too lucky from my side, but I'm super happy I got on top of this one. So when we tally up the final scoring, I did win the kill points with around 1,000 points to 800 points. I also won the scoring in the end with around 500 points to 250 points, so there was a 500 point difference roughly between us. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.